Good day everyone, and welcome to this tutorial on how to build your statue. Now, if you're anything like my past self, you may ask yourself, how do you build a statue? Because anytime that I personally have had any sort of experience building statues, I would struggle because in this game of ours, this delightful little Minecraft world, we don't have any statues, and generally speaking, statues are difficult because the entire game consists of voxel cubes. It's gonna be really hard to pull off, or is it? Here I've got some designs that I want to show you about how I personally would want to go through designing a statue, as well as my genuine process for what I want to do and what I wanted to make for all of these. Starting with the first one. This is kind of basically just going to be a generic design for basically a generic statue, almost like a Greek sort of vibe. It's definitely going to be inspired by Greek hoplites, although, as we will soon discover, it's probably closer to Egypt mythology and their version of Atlantis more than anything, mainly because I just wanted to include a fountain. One of the easier things to make when it comes to statue making, I find, is these pedestals. These are largely going to tell you what you want to build. Whenever I make statues like this, I usually try to limit myself to 9x9 because I find that allows you to have as much creative range but still have your statues being reasonably compact. Second pedestal is basically just your I don't know really what to describe it. I want to say that I was inspired by Chinese or maybe even Aztec mythology, so I wanted to include like a bit of a pyramid aesthetic. It's not 100%, and as we will soon discover, it's going to be less about the pyramids and more just a bit of everything, to be honest. If you don't want to have this sort of geometric shape, maybe something a bit more organic might suit your fancy. This one is basically just a column, almost like a Mario pipe. It has a bit of a texture, but not a whole lot, so it should be fairly easy to replicate. I do specifically like these, I don't know what you would call this rim, because in my personal opinion, if it were just this all the way through, it would just look like a Mario pipe, but because it has like these slits, these like gaps, it adds that little bit of detail. The fourth one is, I kind of just went bananas. This is basically the same thing as there, more of an organic, less man-made thing, but at the same time, I just wanted to see what I can do with a mix of different colors, and as we will probably discover, there's going to be a lot of thinking. Basically, what I went with the three major stone types, which is basically diorite and granite and andesite and sandstone. And to me, I've never really been a fan of diorite or granite. I like sandstone and I like andesite, but making them work together feels like almost something that you would see in just a generic setting where you've got a whole bunch of mines and a whole bunch of like underground people living, because that's what I kind of think of. Sandstone can invoke a bit of a beach vibe, so maybe if you don't want that, you can probably replace it with things like tuff or deep slate. It's going to clash a little bit with andesite, but the colors still work. And I think if you wanted to specifically add like a darker shade to the whole thing, you can do that with tough and deep slate, but I just like the colorful nature of sandstone, which is not really something that you really say about sandstone on a day-to-day life. I also used a couple of these like techniques that I've picked up over the years, such as mixing a dripstone with granite. I think that dripstone and granite are blocks that are just made for one another. As well as that, I just added some dirt and some greenery because I thought that that would be nice. And I'm playing in 1.21.5. I cannot express to you how much I adore this tall, dry grass thing. These look so much nicer than dead bushes. Like, let me demonstrate. Dead bushes can be placed on... Oh, they can't be placed on sand. On stone. But yeah, I understand the nostalgia of dead bushes, but these just invoke a desert feel. And if you want to specifically build something out of sand and sandstone and just in general invoke a desert vibe, I think that mixing in some sand so you can place some dry grass is going to be a must-have. And then the fifth one is kind of a placeholder or like a blank thingy, but that's because I wanted to do something different. For this specific one, I wanted to have a statue that is not made of rock and instead made of wood, namely carved from a single tree, because people used to do that back in the day. And for this specific one, I don't really have a design so much as I have an idea versus anything else. And I'm going to try to explain my thought process behind this idea. Because alongside showcasing 4 of these statues that I've created in the past like week or so, I am also going to make it my mission to, create something out of nothing. Once again, once we'll get to the actual building the statues, these are just pedestals. I'm going to explain to you how I do stuff. Pedestals themselves are really just... They kind of are not necessary, but I find that if I am to build a statue that is supposed to stand as a standalone building, it helps to create a pedestal. If you don't want a standalone building, there is absolutely nothing that's stopping you. So as I've said before, the first statue is kind of just a generic Greek dude, generic sort of ish hoplite. And for this specific idea, I just wanted to have a bit of a battle skirt. And in fact, I'm gonna fix it because I think that it's a bit too long. I'm sure that it has like a name, like a historical, authentic name for the skirts that they used to wear as hoplites. I don't know what it is. I am barely an amateur historian, let alone a professional one. But yeah. The thing that I want to point out is mixing up some textures. Because, cobblestone and andesite are not exactly the same. They share the same color category, but they are still very much different in terms of texture, and that scans. In fact, we can probably add even more distinction between the two by creating these like ridges, so that these are more universally recognized as pieces of cloth that exist outside. Ideally, not personally at least, you would want to, put a bit more thought into what actually constitutes as like sandals, but unfortunately there's just no sandal block unless you want to count like these, which don't particularly look nice. So this is the footwear of our hoplites, and this is the skirt. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that this is just my scale. Once again, this is just 9x9 blocks. You can go however big or small you want. It's just going to require a little bit of designing and potentially figuring out, because this is probably not going to be for everyone, but once again, this is just how I tend to do things. Fortunately, though, human proportions are fairly universal, so even if you don't build with like specific measures of like, what is it, 7 blocks? Yeah, this is 7 blocks, 8 for legs, and then 8 for feet, and then 1 more for the belt, which I actually kind of like quite a lot. The measures should be reasonably easy to adjust, depending on your scale. But yeah, this is just a skirt thingy for a hoplite with 2 legs. You can theoretically just remove all of this and make it so that it is in fact a pair of pants. There's realistically nothing stopping you from doing that. So it's going to be something like this, for instance. And it works quite well. It is a bit on the longer side now that I see it for what it is, but at the same time, I kind of like the idea of drawing your eye towards the top. So all of the important stuff is going to be higher than it probably would have been on a regular human being. But that's because, well, these are statues, these are supposed to be quite tall. Creating ridges can add some depth, but I wouldn't go too overboard with that idea. Mainly because, you know, sometimes less does pay more, so to speak. The second idea is a bit more, I don't know, flowy, I suppose. This one is meant to be a dress skirt or like a robe kind of thing. I made it out of cobblestone. You can do whatever you want, realistically. But for this specific one, you just want to add like... You just want to follow the natural curve of dresses. And admittedly, I probably didn't do it quite a bit of justice because it's a bit high, all things considered. Like if I actually went ahead and made it, yeah, this is a bit more realistic, but at the same time, it's not quite as good looking. Like this side has a lot of volume than the other. Now that I have actually put it like this. To go into a bit of a different route, one that may not necessarily use a whole lot of, well, leg. Once again, these are mainly inspired by Age of Mythology, and one of the more interesting things that Age of Mythology did with their statues is it included at least one statue that is just a snake person. Which are fairly common in Chinese mythology, so I wanted to include one here. Mainly because I like the idea, mainly because I like the form and the, I guess, challenge of creating something that is as unconventional as a snake tail out of Minecraft blocks. And I think that I've done a fairly good job. I also tinkered a little bit with the pedestal from the last bit. Hope you don't mind that. This one specifically is not meant to be anything fancy, primarily because another thing that I wanted to do is an entity that's sort of encased in a rock that they have. This one has no real reason to be encased other than maybe it's an individual that has been carved from a rock or imprisoned into a rock, and as such I find that it's generally the rock itself is not meant to be special, but the individual inside the rock is, which we're going to go in the next little while. And we go back to the tree stump. Now, for this one, all of the previous stuff, or most of the previous stuff, is actually made out of a singular block, or at least a singular block type. Say for this one, but even still, the rock itself, the one that serves as legs, is not really that special. For this specific one, I wanted to demonstrate, well, first and foremost, how I would want to build something like this, which is, again, you kind of eyeball the desired height that you want. You also you also forget about the fact that I set this as at a different thing. You also forget about the fact that I managed to make it odd numbers. Is it off-centered? It's not off-centered, I'm just bad. The thing about these sort of organic shapes and stuff is you actually have the ability to integrate a few different colors, and I would advise you to integrate colors whenever possible, because while obviously statues like this are going to be made specifically out of one singular type of material, primarily wood, stone, maybe copper, metal, whatever suits your fancy. But specifically, it adds a lot to life when you can add almost like bits of environmental storytelling about your statues. And so, for instance, this one is basically going to be a Norse deity-ish. I don't know what kind of Norse deity I'm going for. I probably should, considering that I'm a big mythology guy, but still. Well, one of the best things moving forward is to make great acquaintance of two blocks, and I mean this in various forms and various colors and shapes and stuff. Well, not shapes. The blocks in question are slabs and stairs. And if you're building in Minecraft, you're going to make the acquaintance regardless of the situation. But for this specific situation, some people would have you believe that, say for instance, if you were built in a face, that the lowest you can go with built in a face would be kind of like this 5x5 thingy. And stairs and slabs will demonstrate that that doesn't really have to be the case. I'm gonna talk about this in the next little while, but trust me, it genuinely does not have to be the case, and stairs and slabs are the way to go forward with that idea. So yeah, I like this quite a lot. I think I'm going to add some like details later down the line, but for now, at the very least, I like this as is, and it invokes a bit of a Norse feel to me personally. Now let's go on to the next section, which is torsos. Torsos, one might be forgiven for thinking that torsos are going to just be as easy as the legs, but in my experience personally, I have sort of come upon the realization that torsos are a bit more unique, or at the very least they are whenever I sort of try to tackle them. And that's because, well, torsos add a lot of character to your statues by the virtue of adding arms, and more importantly than anything else, accessories, such as this pole arm right here, and this weird hand that I'm going to do. that I'm going to outline next. However, before we continue on, I would like to discuss another little tidbit, and that's texture. As I've discussed with mixing and matching the colors on the wooden statue that I'm going to make into something a bit later, textures can also play a big role on your vision of the character that you're trying to create a statue out of. For instance, this one, I know that historically hoplites aren't really known for carrying a whole lot of armor on their legs and feet, but I kind of went almost with the idea of this andesite being an equivalent of like bronze, like a texture equivalent of bronze, rather than bare skin, which is instead used by this just a regular stone texture. So for instance, this entire arm is supposed to be just an unarmored arm. This little thing is supposed to be armor, and cobblestone, for its part, is supposed to be an equivalent of cloth. Which is why you see it here on the shoulders. It is supposed to kind of be like an undershirt, or I don't know, some kind of a classical age equivalent of an undershirt. And yeah, the polearm is also kind of a andesite metal-ish thing. I know that spears aren't exactly made out of metal themselves, that's the whole point, but still, I kind of like the idea of an andesite spear. The interesting part about this that I found works quite well is this thing, chiseled stone bricks. Minding the fact that the front texture looks a bit odd, I find that it works surprisingly well, at least if you're willing to suspend your disbelief, as a hand. And we're going to see that a bit more in the future, but it works remarkably well as a hand. It almost behooves me to say that I kind of want more chiseled variations of stone, and maybe even chiseled wood types, because the closest thing that I would have picked for wood would have been this stripped wood variation, which works, don't get me wrong, but it's not quite the same, even when just juxtaposed with a bunch of other wood types. So if I were to replace the color of this particular arm with wood, it works, and it works reasonably well, but it's not quite the same. I would like there to be things like brick or wood or something of a kind. Speaking of brick, another thing to build a fairly convincing hand would be stone brick, personally, but I quite like the idea of chiseled stone brick a bit more than I like the regular stone brick. The rope statue, for its part, is also holding a polearm. However, this one holds it with two hands, and this one might be a bit more tricky to pull off, because this one requires, you know, a bit of forward thinking, but because it is also a roped figure, you do have a bit of a leeway, because, well, obviously a lot of the anatomy parts of this statue are going to be covered by just the most ridiculous amounts of cloth, which is both a blessing and a curse. I do like the idea of ropes on statues, because again, it makes things just significantly easier, perhaps. But this specific one is not really my favorite, mainly because at least not right now, because it's just one big solid mess of a cobblestone. And I like cobblestone as much as the next guy. but I think that the future holds a bit more substance to it. Once again, you can see the chiseled stone brick being used as hands. I don't mind the stone brick once again, to reiterate, but I think the chiseled stone brick is significantly better in terms of hands. Here we have the snake serpentine goddess again. I have forgotten to remove a thing. Just foreshadowing, I guess. This specific one also involves a robe, but more so a kimono than anything specific. And the way that we outline that is through two things. One is this collar, which uses cobblestone. Despite the fact that andesite in the previous statue was used to convey metallic armor, this time it's all about, well, silk and cloth. While this cobblestone, I almost imagine it as being like a fur texture over anything else. You could try to make it work with wool, but wool doesn't really have slab or star variations, and also the colors don't really align themselves all too well with the pre-existing things. You can theoretically pull off some gray wool details if you want to mix and match it with things like deep slate, but personally I would still advise you to go with cobblestone or something of a kind if you were building heavily out of variations of stone and andesite. One of the more interesting things is I have actually used stone again to convey the actual skin texture. As well as that, I've made a stone stair neck. It's going to be a bit of a thin one. I would normally prefer to go full like this, maybe even like this, but because this is a feminine figure, I felt like it would call for a bit more of a slimmer neck, as well as just, you know, separating cloth of cobblestone and the actual neck of regular stone. Finally, we have this rock guy, and this one I'm not entirely 100% sold on. I think I tried to make this guy into this buff warrior archetype. The stone texture on the skin does not quite work as well for this one, but I just wanted to demonstrate a point that I'm trying to make. And that's, you don't really have to lock yourself into stiff positions such as, you know, just holding a polearm or holding nothing at all. You can have quite a bit of creative freedom, even in a 9x9 space. So for instance, in this particular situation, we've got one massive, chunky, beefy muscle arm sort of on the bottom, and the other be the other in a position of like throwing a fist to the sky. And then finally we go back to our demonstrative little thing. For this one, I said that I was going to build someone out of Norse mythology, or maybe at least I've thought that I was going to, and that's what counts, really, doesn't it? So for this one, I would normally try to go at least a little bit higher than 4 blocks, but specifically for this, I don't think that it's going to be all too necessary. This is just a 4-block little torso, again, excluding the block that was used on the thing, on the belt. Just creating some shoulders. This does really feel like less of building and more of sculpting, which is really quite exciting. Let me just grab some oak. stuff. I'm still not sure as to which god I would like it to be, but I am going to give myself some room to maneuver things with. And more important than perhaps all of this is the fact that I'm going to make quite interesting arms, or at least I'm going to try and make interesting arms. This one might not be quite as interesting as I would initially like it to be, but that's because a lot of the character for these statues comes from accessorizing them accordingly. And one of my personal favorites is a big shield. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, how big are we talking? Nameshifter, you've already outlined this as a fairly decently sized build. To that I say, wrong. We're gonna make it even bigger. For this specific shield, you can try a whole bunch of different things, but I'm going to just throw out a couple of suggestions. Because as recently as like a couple of days ago, I have built this exact shield and just fell in love with it the instant that I've made it work. I'm going to rely on this exact shield to carry me through. This is basically just going to be a round shield, but notice the texture. Because of the fact that we're working in a very tiny space, every bit of detail that you can put into the build is going to count tremendously. And this sort of swirling, almost a spiral, or at least as close to a spiral pattern as you can possibly get in Minecraft, or at least in this small of a space, is going to count. And I personally think that this looks quite a lot like the interlocking well, in the case of the Norsemen, it would be interlocking triangles, but again, triangles would be significantly harder to make in this small of a scale. But in here, you've got two interlocking ellipses, and I think that this looks quite pleasing to the eye aesthetically. You can realistically pull it off with something like, say for instance, spruce, but one thing about strip spruce that you will find is that it doesn't have quite as big of an outline between the different logs as dark oak. And if you're sat there going, well, dark oak doesn't really match the color scheme, it is literally as easy as just adding a few bits of dark oak. In fact, I'm going to touch upon this exact situation later in the thing, but creating these almost gradient colors is going to also come in handy because, well, these are always pleasing to look at. Maybe you can even use the dark oak to transition into something even darker. For instance, right now I'm using it to blend together the colors between spruce and oak. And yeah, this color combination works surprisingly well. You can decorate, you can imagine just this place also got decorated. I'm pulling off a green here. On the other hand, quite literally, on the other arm, I would probably say, I'm gonna make it bent at the elbow. And for this specific one, I'm actually going to utilize kind of like what I did with the serpentine goddess statue over here, creating a bit of a sleeve, but to a significantly lesser extent, because here I'm just going to make it like this. It works. It conveys the message across that this is in fact a sleeve, but it doesn't do so in a manner that is so over the top to convey the exact aspect of things like a kimono would, and instead just tracks as a bit of a, as a bit of a coat, or perhaps a gambeson. Also, the back, you can take it or leave it. I personally think that it's nicer if you fill in the back as well, just so it doesn't look like he has a flat back, because no real human really does. And then finally, the last thing that we want to add is a bit of an accessory. Now, birch doesn't exactly strike me as 100% of what I would use for this one, if I did want to, in fact, keep in the, the aspect of, hey, look, this is a big statue carved out of a single tree. But it does demonstrate that some things work when they go against the grain. There is unfortunately nothing that I can put here, or at least nothing that immediately springs to mind. I think we can always just plop one of those there. Although it does now clash with the sleeve, which is rather unfortunate. Alas, sacrifices. And then finally you can cap it up with an end rod. Or, if you're feeling particularly fancy and want to go back into the birch territory, this one also works reasonably well. As I've already said plenty of times, the water fountain statue thing was always going to be a hoplite, and for this specific one, I mean, I personally don't really have to go very far to get myself a reasonable reference point. Magneto does mostly wear kind of like a hoplite helmet, except for this little fan here. The fan is basically just a bunch of cobblestone walls, because on the one hand you can add stairs and slabs and get, the brush effect like this, but I personally think that the cobblestone walls look a bit nicer because, they're significantly less wide than the actual blocks, and I think that helps quite a lot. Remember how I said that you don't really need to make it a 5 by however long, however much you want it to be when it comes to building a face? This is what I'm talking about. Despite the fact that this is, and we can even remove these. Despite the fact that, as far as heads go, it still would ideally need 5 blocks. Not all 5 blocks of this is actually going to be based around the face. These stairs, and to a certain extent slabs, if you want to go for a bit of an Undertale fresque kind of vibe, are going to be ridiculously useful for making eyes out of. You can go with a bit... That's wrong. You can go with a bit of a derpy face, maybe even do something that looks a little bit like this. You can go for something that looks a little bit like this, like a fish. You can leave them as wide as you possibly want, or you can do you can just do whatever I did originally, which is this. This would be my default, blocks pointing up and inwards, You can have this sort of small face, also works reasonably well. And just for completion's sake. Yeah, another derpy face, although this one is a bit lower than the previous one. But yeah, you genuinely, there's no real reason as to why anyone should still believe that you absolutely have to go with 5 blocks as the minimum for your head. I mean, this one does, but the 5 blocks are actually just to cover up the stairs and stuff. The actual face is 3 by like 2, which I would personally consider nowadays to be a bare minimum. Taking a bit of inspiration from an actual history, and not wanting to demonstrate another face for at least one statue, I went with a bit of a Plague Doctor design mask. And one of the biggest things that I would want to demonstrate in this particular situation is has to do specifically with the fact that not every single immediate option, or at least not every single option that immediately comes to mind, is going to be the right one. As you can probably see, or at least as you can probably will see, the Plague Doctors wore a whole slew of different kinds of masks. And despite the fact that we tend to think of them as white, even if it is a misconception, white, at least quartz white, does not bode well for this particular build, mainly because everything else is just stone, and white is such a stark contrast that it just does not quite work in this particular situation. You can try and add diorite to soften it, but in my personal opinion, it just makes the mask look dirty or unpolished. And I get that that's the case, or at least that was the case for the thing, but now he just looks like he himself caught the plague. He does not look like a doctor anymore, he just looks like the victim. And so instead of well, your obvious choice for a porcelain mask, or at least a mask that people might believe was porcelain at one point, this guy, this funky little bird guy, is just going to rock a stone mask, because I find that works well enough. The difference is subtle, but it is there, and it works quite well if you let it do its magic. Next up, the Serpentine Goddess. Just like with the scales on the snake tail and the fur, I decided that the more organic texture for the hair is going to also be represented with cobblestone. I don't particularly like the fact that it's clashing with the fur on her dress, or on her kimono, apologies. But for this one, I think that it works reasonably well. And the face being utilized, again, a 3x2, utilizing a lot of stairs to do the heavy lifting in terms of face features. It's quite alright. I specifically like this cheek design, because this is meant to be a slimmer figure, and as such the slimmer head also calls for slimmer cheeks. For this particular one, I just decided to give her a sort of like slimmer face shape, which the difference is minuscule, especially with the hoplite, but it is here, and I do quite like how it turned out. I also decided to give her a bit of a crown, because, once again, accessories break or make statues. And then for the big guy, I'm gonna say that I fluctuated with giving him a big head or a small head. I just wanted to make something a bit monstrous, so I gave him the biggest overbrow and underbite, as well as utilizing an entire stone stare for his nose. Normally, on a statue like this or the hoplite guy, I would entirely neglect to give characters noses, because most of the time it would be overkill to just add even something as simple as a, if I could find one, a wall. This already does not look right, and stairs, yeah, never gonna happen. But for this, being monstrous actually serves this guy quite a lot, because you can go with very exaggerated facial features that would not look good on quite literally anyone else other than this funky little rock fella. But for this one, this specific orcish archetype, it does genuinely work wonders. Going back to this whole thing, I did promise that I would want to go a bit of a step further, and that, to me, on top of creating a head shape, which is obviously going to be quite important, as the statues of Norse gods typically do involve heads, but I also wanted to make another little thing to fully tie in that this is in fact a character from like a colder plane of existence, and that's a cape. You'll see various Viking and Norseman characters wear just the most like lush and flowing capes. I don't know how historically authentic these things are. If there is anyone who wants to correct me in the comments, I'm willing to live in ignorance on this one. I'm willing to spend the rest of my days believing that Vikings did in fact have capes to battle. Even if it's not authentic, it looks cool. It functions well as far as like medium, visual medium are concerned, and just in general, I just think that everything can look cool with a well-executed cape. I am very much the exact opposite of one Edna mode on that front. Capes are impractical. You probably shouldn't use it if you're a superhero, but they'd look pretty sick. Yeah, this is the cape. And for another thing, just to also give the character a bit, give the cape a bit more character, I would also suggest making it droop on this side as well, because, well, you most likely have made it out of some kind of animal, and animals typically have limbs, and so to give a suggestion that this cape retains said animal's limbs, I think that it's going to work reasonably well if you just do a couple of these. Yeah. And then, of course, to quite literally top it all off, here's just a basic head. I need oak stairs. Plop some eyes. Plop a mouth. Maybe make them out. Maybe make them darker. And give this individual a big ol' helmet. Maybe not that big. Although it does bring me onto another idea that I used to do. Do I have any? I do. Cool. One other thing that you can do is basically mix in the textures. Again, going back all the way at the beginning, where we mix textures to create a sort of specialized feel. This works surprisingly well when you want to make a helmet that has like a line going down the middle. I think it's to reinforce. I think it was used to reinforce the helmets in battle. And, well, nothing says more reinforced than an actual trunk of a tree, albeit a stripped version of, going through the middle of your helm. Of course, after this, it's just a personal preference. I know for a fact that Vikings didn't have these, but little horns or antlers can go a long way when outlining something like this. Or if you want to go for something that Vikings actually had, something like this can also go a long way. Beards are the capes of the facial world. And yeah, this immediately, at least personally, this immediately tracks as a Norse warrior. And then finally, we've got some trinkets. And by trinkets, I mean do the rest of the owl. As you can probably see, I've done some major thingies. I fiddled around with water in order to create this sort of hand shape that would make this, I'm just gonna say it, Aquarius statue pour water in the exact location that I wanted it to. I fiddled around with the trident using pale oak fence and rods, similar to what I did with the Norse Viking thing. Because the face is supposed to be obscured under this helmet, I basically just made a cobblestone blank expression, because while I could realistically give this guy a proper face, the statue is at a height, at enough of a height to where you really aren't going to see the face, and the fact that the helmet obscures it is just kind of like an icing on a cake or the nail on a coffin, depending on how you want to look at it. And yeah, so I didn't really do a whole lot. You can realistically go even darker to create even more of a shaded feeling, so for instance using blackstone or basalt, like this. But I think that I found that to be a bit too much of a contrast, and while I do like a bit of a contrast, this specific aesthetic, I think, is not doesn't have the right feel for me to actually use Blackstone. Plague Doctor gets himself a nice Plague Doctor stick inspired by the actual bird sticks that the doctors used to walk around with. And a bit of an experiment with creating gradients. Despite the fact that I said that Blackstone would be a bit too dark for, you know, a contrast between stone and andesite, I did want to create a bit of a weathered, maybe even shaded feeling between the lighter shades of stone and almost like this dark deep slate. And as such, I've created a bit of a gradient, utilizing all sorts of different stone textures and all sorts of different things. So I went from generic cobblestone to tough. The texture is messy enough to where I think that it does actually work. Then from tough I transitioned to a colder cobblestone deep slate. I do kind of wish that tough wasn't quite as green, but oh well. And then deep slate tiles until finally we get blackstone that is basically supposed to represent the shaded area under the legs. And yeah, if you want to go even more fancy, you can add things like lichen to bring the gradient even further, because this pale moss and tough and stuff along those lines with lichen will actually work wonders between the two. But I think it works well enough as is, and I quite like how it looks. Also, I did replace mossy cobblestone from all the way back with tough, just so, you know, this thing actually has a bit more consistency. That's one of the other things that you probably need to keep in mind is nothing is really set in stone, despite the fact that these statues are literally made of stone. You can fiddle, you can play around with things, and just make whatever works, and whatever doesn't, you can always change it. The Serpentine Goddess. I'm gonna be the first one to admit that I went a bit bananas. Because this is this sort of a natural pedestal, I kind of knew that I was going to go with a design that features a lot of greenery, but I think I might have gone just a tiny little bit overboard, because this one, yeah, I've pulled every trick out of my book. Especially on like these top bits, I wanted to make sure that it was about as weathered as I possibly can get it to be, because, you know, moss would probably grow first and foremost on the bits of the statue that specifically was exposed to the sun. As such, there's a lot of moss on the top of her tail, on the top of her chest, on the top of her head, and even some on her arms. I used these green banners to represent moss in the beginning of the rock guy pedestal, and I think that they work wonders here as well. It's a bit samey, realistically speaking, but I don't care. I love moss, and I love mossy cobblestone and mossy stone break variants. I also have given her a bit of a, I don't know what you would call it, just a bit of bush in her hand, just to connect her with nature even more. I gave her some cactus on her crown, and even some lovely little earrings that don't actually go on her ears, they're instead attached to her hair. Now, there we go. I think this also helps with the aesthetic. I don't know if it works exactly the same. I would have probably put like some greener lanterns, but unfortunately we only have a cold lantern, you know, soul lantern, and then just a regular warm lantern. One thing that you may notice that on the bottom of her tail and on these like bottom arm, bottom torso. There's not a whole lot of moss here. That's deliberate because, as I said before, the logic was that the most moss is going to grow when it's exposed to the sun, which is actually way over there. Which, now that I think about it, does not make a whole lot of sense, but let's imagine that it was right at the top here. And because of that, you know, I decided that, hey, there's not going to be a whole lot of moss where there is shade, or at least proverbial shade. If you wanted to, you could apply the same shading gradient technique as you would previously, mixing deep slate and tough into this thing, specifically when there is not a whole where there isn't a whole lot of light shining down on the statue. But for this particular scale, I thought that that would be going a bit overboard, specifically with the moss in mind, and it's going to be a bit hard to distinguish certain features. So theoretically you can make it work, but for this little tutorial I just decided to make basically one thing at a time. The monster, the rock guy. I also went a bit bananas, and I decided to integrate a lot, and I mean a lot of color for this guy. I added the nipple. I cannot tell you why, but I specifically gave him a granite sort of tunic. Mixing and matching some stuff from basically this thing. I didn't add a whole lot of moss this time, and maybe I could realistically add some, because, well, I love moss. These bushes, these new bushes to be specific, also do a lot of heavy lifting for things among the for this specific statue, because I don't know if you've noticed, but I've used them quite a lot. And one of the other things that I really enjoyed was giving this little bit of almost like a man-made stalagmite or rock column. Normally you would probably use dripstone in order to achieve the same effect, but I found, I mean, I have, for all intents and purposes, but dripstone really only worked with granite, and the arms on this guy are, well, not granite. So I decided to give him a bit of a man-made stalactite made out of iron and andesite, and it worked surprisingly well. I didn't know what to give him as like his accessory of choice. I gave him this little cup thing. It is even centered though, because the hand itself is even centered, so I had to finagle it to look like a 3x3 as opposed to 4x4, which is this. And I think that it works reasonably well. Also, one thing that I've neglected to notice from the last thing is that on the main rock that's supposed to cover the golem's body, I've also added these like rock formations to mirror the ones on the bottom, to once again emphasize the fact that this is in fact one giant thing, and maybe this is also carved out of a singular piece of rock. It's just a very weird one. And yeah, the copper cup, the copper chalice, would probably just be a man-made object, such as, well, because you would probably, It would probably be easier to just make it like that. And same can probably be said about this trident or this low plague doctor stick. I do not intend on those to be original pieces of the actual statues. And just to further drive in the point, you can actually make it so that they stand out even more. Because of how many blocks we have currently in the game, it's really easy to just make things like this, for instance, happen. An entire marble trident. Although now I wish that I added some more like chiseled stuff. Give me a second. An entire trident made of marble, ish. We don't have marble, we have diorite and calcite, but that's besides the point. Or, for instance, this thing could be made out of copper or acacia or red sandstone or whatever else. Basically, if you want there to be a center of attention, you can absolutely just go and grab the attention with whatever you want. For this specific one, I'm just demonstrating a few things. I'm not intending this to be a default design. If I wanted to go fully bananas, I probably would, but for now it just serves as an introduction to make little embellishment statues in your Minecraft world. And yeah, the last thing to do would be to create some kind of something for the wood guy. And while I can theoretically just go full round of just replacing a few of these with more dark types of wood, I think the general idea is fairly clear. Just grab a couple of blocks, see what sticks for your specific idea, maybe come up with a bit of a background for how the statue came to be, how things work in your specific environment. It will be easier if you already have, if you're drawing inspiration from the environment that existed IRL. For instance, I've gone for kind of like a, I've got for Norse mythology, Chinese mythology, actual medieval like stuff, Greece, classical age Greece, rock. Anything that you want to do, there's probably 1,000 ways to do them properly. My way is only one out of currently 5 out of 10,000. So if you want to learn a bit more, you can stick around to see what else I can come up with off the top of my head. But generally speaking, at least for now, it's probably gonna have to be it. Never fear to fiddle with the statues that you've created. Never fear to fiddle, in fact, with anything that you create. Fiddling is how we got to where we are as a human race, and I want you to remember that. Make the cape a bit more voluminous. Maybe if you go with a scale large enough to where you can pull off adding like an actual head somewhere over here, you can also do that as well. I'm sure that will give you a lot of style points. Myself, I'm just making a fairly small rendition of what I would want to see if I were in a Norse village. The spruce leaves may not make the final cut. Now, as far as making the last little touches on the Norse fella here. I don't really have a whole lot that I want to include. I find that fence gates work reasonably well if you want to just give some smaller horns for whatever reason, in case these two big ones aren't enough. I've made the cape a bit more voluminous, and if you really want to go overboard, you can try to add like a head of an animal, like a bear or a wolf here. But for this particular case, I just wanted to create a bit of a feel of the fact that this guy is in fact quite dangerous to hang out with. You can theoretically add like some tiny little leaves to make to serve as an impression that this is in fact this was in fact used to be a tree. However you decide to do that, well, it's gonna have to be up to you. My way is one of 1,000 others, and while this tutorial is meant to inspire people to build with statues, it's once again just the way that I would like to go about doing things in the projects that you may or may not see in the future. But for now, I think that I'm done. I might revisit this topic after I get a bit more into building things. But for now, I bid you farewell, and I'm gonna see if I can come up with a few different ideas for what I want to build next time. So, yeah. See you around.